Hey guys, good morning. I just got started for the day and happy Tuesday. It is actually Tuesday for me. It is just Tuesday the 14th, not Tuesday the 24th, first. Um, but I made sure to put my tiara on, especially for today's recording. And I wanted to just give you a few updates on things. Now, granted, I am recording this a week behind, so I haven't received, I think I got two poems so far, the lyric poems, but I haven't looked at them yet. I just have looked at your poems about poetry and your narrative poems, and they have been great. So I know a lot of you are worried and didn't think that you could do this, but a lot of you are a lot more talented than you give yourself credit for, okay? So just keep trying, all right? My biggest advice to you is that don't use words just because they rhyme, because poetry doesn't have to rhyme. I know that's an easy fallback, like, ooh, this doesn't really sound like a poem. I'll make it rhyme, and then it does sound like a poem. But the problem when you use words just because they rhyme is that that's when the poem kind of sounds silly. Um, in a lyric poem, the point is to just express emotion. So express emotion. If it rhymes, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. That's not the point. A narrative poem tells a story in a little more imaginative detail and fewer words than a short story. But don't worry about rhyming unless it fits. Okay, if you really, really, really want to rhyme, find words that work in your poem. Okay, don't just, use a random word because it rhymes. Like, I got a guy that I dated in high school. This is a little more information than you might want. You can skip this if you don't want to listen. Uh, he wanted to write me poetry because he thought that would impress me. And so he tried to rhyme a word with my first name, which is Allison. And I don't remember the line, but Allison was the end of one line, and then the word that rhymed with it, and like the phrase was, she wore a moccasin. If I've never worn a moccasin in my entire life. Uh, but it was the thought that counted, of course, and of course it worked. He wooed me. But like don't do an Allison moccasin rhyme, okay? Because it just is like ooh, cringy. Okay, so that's my advice to you. This week you are going to be learning about form poetry. Today we're going to be talking about topical form poetry, meaning that the content of the poem is dictated to you by the type of poem it is. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about structural form poetry, in that there are a lot of rules about maybe syllables or rhyme scheme and things like that. Okay, those are a bit more difficult. And then Thursday, you're going to have a reading day, and then there's a discussion board that you need to participate in after you've done your reading. Okay, you're going to write something about your book, making sure that you pay attention to mentioning the title, the author, and if the subject matter isn't obvious by the title and the author, make sure you mention it too. Like my book, the title and author don't give anything away about the subject, so I would need to include that it's about Ernest Hemingway's involvement with the CIA during World War II. Okay. And then you're also going to comment on somebody else's post. I am going to comment on the post, but commenting on my post won't get you the necessary credit. Feel free to comment on my post, but if you comment on mine, you also need to comment on another, so you need to do two comments. Feel free to comment on as many as you want. Just please make sure that the comments are relevant and not negative. I mean, if you want to pop on somebody's and say hi, that's fine. That just won't count. Like if you really miss someone, you're like, oh, I miss you, so and so. You can do that. That's fine. I'm not gonna like get mad at you for doing that, but that won't count as your comment. You need to comment about the content of their post regarding the book. Okay. And that's for Thursday. And that's kind of how things will run through the rest of April and May. You'll have one day designated for reading until you need to have the book finished. Okay. And yeah, I'll talk more about the future in weeks to come. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to flip you to a screen recording and make sure you have a copy of the notes out. If you want to be adding to them, you are more than welcome to just follow along with the video lesson. Definitely watch the video lesson because I say more than is in the notes. Okay, just because I didn't want to be really cumbersome in the notes because it's boring to read that kind of stuff. All right, see you on the flip side. Hey guys, here we are with the notes. So today we're going to be talking about form poetry, as I mentioned just a minute ago. You can take notes however you want. You can copy the slideshow and jot some things down in the speaker notes that I add. You can write things out in a notebook, or if you want, you can just follow along with the video. I would at least make a copy of these notes. The reason why I'm still doing notes and things like that, it's not only for homework, but especially for those of you who are going to plan on taking AP Literature, these are things that I want you to know when you come to my class your senior year. All these different types of form poetry and stuff like that. So make sure you keep these, especially those of you who are planning on or even thinking about taking AP Lit not next year, your senior year. Okay, so some definitions. Form poetry, this is a very basic definition. It is poetry that has rules attached to it. And there are two kinds. There's topical, meaning what's in the poem is important, and structural, how the poem is written. So today we'll be doing topical poetry. Again, when the words are about the subject matter of the poem. This was a quote by Percy Bysshe Shelley, who's a famous poet from the 1800s. Poetry lifts the veil from the hidden beauty of the world and makes familiar objects be as if they were not familiar. And again, that's Percy Bysshe Shelley. I'm trying to think of a poem that he wrote off the top of your head, or off the top of my head that you might know, but I can't think of one. Okay, so today we're studying topical form poetry, and we're going to look at three: pastoral, elegies, and apostrophes. And there are tons more. We can't get into all of it, so we're just going to look at these three because they're really the most commonly used, I think, personally. Okay, so first, a definition of pastoral, because it doesn't have anything to do with being a pastor. However, I think you'll see the connection when I explain some. The definition of a pastoral poem is a work of literature portraying an idealized version of country life. So being out in the country as opposed to the city. So out where you guys live, unless you live in Plainfield, and then it doesn't count. But pastoral comes from the Latin word pastore, which means shepherd. And then you can kind of see where the term pastor came from, because in the Bible there is a lot of shepherd and sheep imagery, so you kind of can see where that word came from. Also, another word that came from pastore is pasture, which is where, animals graze and things like that. So just a little free vocabulary lesson for you, since we're not doing vocabulary anymore. But the poem in the picture is the example of a pastoral. I had a really difficult time of finding a pastoral poem that wasn't really, really long, because a lot of them are. If you like Robert Frost, he did the Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, the one from the narrative poem day. He has a lot of really good pastoral poems, and he was an American, so it's about the American countryside. But most of these poems are actually really long, and this is one that I found that was a little shorter, so I'll read it to you. The dove walks with sticky feet upon the green crowns of the almond tree, its feathers smeared over with warmth like honey that dips lazily down into the shadow. Anyone standing in that orchard, so filled with peace, would hardly have noticed the hill nearby, with its three strange wooden arms, lifted above the throng of motionless people, above the helmets of pilots, soldiers, flashing like silver teeth in the sun. Okay, so you definitely see the pastoral elements. It's talking about nature and, the dove and trees and honey. But then also the setting is in an orchard, a very peaceful orchard, and that sort of thing. Okay. A lot of times pastoral poems are also narrative poems, like they tell a story, but they can also be lyric poems as well, so it's not just one kind. Next, we've got elegies. Elegy is a poem that is a lament for the dead, so it is about either a specific person that is dead, or sometimes it is about a group of people that have passed. Usually it is about a specific person, but not always. In your slideshow, you can click on this picture and it will take you to a website that has a lot of different elegies on it. Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is one of my favorites, but it's very long. You'll notice In Memoriam, poem that we looked at when we were looking at lyric poetry, is on there. And then the one that I wanted to look at with you is by another one of my favorite poets, Walt Whitman, and this is "O Captain, My Captain." This one is a little bit longer, but it's a quick read, and I really love it. It is about the death of Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War. Whitman was a huge supporter of Lincoln and the Northern cause, and he wrote this after Lincoln's death. "O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But O heart, 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 O the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shores are crowdin'. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer, his lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm, he has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with objects won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. So again, a very beautiful poem in honor of Abraham Lincoln. A couple of things I did want to point out to you, some terms I want you to know. Extended metaphor. An extended metaphor is a metaphor, so you say something is something else, but instead of just being one line, it lasts throughout the entire poem. In this poem, there is an extended metaphor in that Abraham Lincoln is the captain of the ship, and that is the metaphor there. Then the other metaphor is that the ship is the United States of America, and when he talks about the voyage closed and done, that voyage is a metaphor for the Civil War, and that Lincoln did not get to see really the end of the Civil War, and like what the aftermath of that was. But anyway, so lovely poem, and again that has a great extended metaphor. Sorry, I'm getting tripped up on my words. The next one that I want to talk to you about is called an apostrophe, and it has nothing to do with the punctuation mark. An apostrophe is a poem that speaks directly to someone who is not present or is dead, or speaks to an inanimate object. Now, one thing I did want to mention here is these three types aren't always isolated. So, for example, an an elegy can have an apostrophe in it. For example, "Oh Captain, my Captain," there are some stanzas where he addresses Abraham Lincoln, um, like talks to him, and he is obviously dead. So he apostrophizes Abraham Lincoln. But a poem that is an apostrophe would speak directly to someone or an inanimate object throughout the entirety. So there are parts of that elegy that are an apostrophe, but the entire thing is not an apostrophe. Okay. I love apostrophes. I don't know why, but some of my favorite poems um, are apostrophes or apostrophize in their poems. And one of my all time favorite poems is the poem that we're going to read here. This is a picture of the Chicago skyline. And the poem we're going to look at is called Chicago. Again, this is a little bit of a longer poem, but it's just great. And I love the city of Chicago, so that's probably why. This was written by Carl Sandburg around the turn of the century, the 1900s, when Chicago was a huge industrial force, and had a lot of. It was, well, for one, it was the meat packing industry hub of the country. But anyway, without further ado, I will read the poem to you. Chicago by Carl Sandburg. Hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and the nation's freight handler. Stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them, for I have seen your painted women under the gas lamps luring the farm boys. And they tell me you are crooked, and I answer, yes, it is true. I have seen the gunmen kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me you are brutal, and my reply is, on the faces of women and children I have seen the marks of wanton hunger. And having answered so, I turn once more to those who sneer at this my city, and I give them back the sneer and say to them, come and show me another city with lifted head, singing so proud to be alive and coarse and strong and cunning, flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job on job. Here is a tall, bold slugger, set vivid against the little soft cities. Fierce as a dog with tongue lapping for action, cunning as a savage pitted against the wilderness, bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Under the smoke, dust all over his mouth, laughing with white teeth, under the terrible burden of destiny, laughing as a young man laughs, laughing even as an ignorant fighter laughs who had never lost a battle, bragging and laughing that under his wrist is the pulse, and under his ribs the heart of the people, laughing. Laughing the storm, husky, brawling laughter of youth, half naked, sweating, proud to be hog butcher, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and freight handler to the nation. I just love that poem so much. It's beautifully well written, and I think very descriptive of the power of the city of Chicago, especially during this time period. People often criticize it as being a dirty, ugly city, but Sandburg loved the city and saw the beauty of the hardworking people as opposed to the negative of the few that kind of gave Chicago a bad name. So, very cool poem. All right, so it's your turn now. I want you to write one type of topical form poetry. Make sure to label which type you're attempting. Are you doing pastoral, an elegy, or an apostrophe, or are you mixing it all up? Because you could do all three in one poem if you wanted. If you would like to write more than one, I'll throw some extra credit your way. They must be turned in on the same document, and they must both be labeled, both what type it is and what poetic devices are being used. Okay, and depending on the extent of the second poem will determine how much extra credit you get. I'll give you as much as 10 extra credit points for a good poem that is well labeled. Okay. All right, I'm not going to flip the camera back around. We'll just end here. I hope to see you at the Google Meet. Remember, I am throwing some extra credit at you for going to those, and they are for just fun, kicks and giggles, or if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. All right, have a great day, guys.